We've completed the first phase of the development of our photo application, and now it's ready to deploy either into production or testing environment. But before we push it across, there are a number of things that we need to do first. In smaller application development teams, it's easy to keep track of development versus production configurations. But even then, it's important to be aware of overwriting the production configuration. In larger systems, it becomes imperative to split the configuration file into manageable portions. In this session, we'll see how to do this and also set other production server settings. As much of our original code was auto-generated by G, there are bound to be areas that were created but we don't actually need. And now would be a good time to prune out these unneeded surplus bits of code, both from a housekeeping perspective and also for security, in that these areas may not have the correct business rules assigned or may give access to areas that we don't want. So here's a list of what we can remove from the application. So let's just nip through and delete all those. So that's removed a lot of dead wood. And next we can look at our main configuration. That's the protected config main.php file. Firstly, and one of the most important things, is we must remove access to G. Can you imagine if somebody managed to get access to a production server through G? How embarrassing would that be? In the database, we can set the enable parameter logging and enable profiling to false to remove any chance of debugging information. We can also configure schema caching duration, which will cache the schema lookups that you may have noticed when we were debugging our application. Each time that Yi creates a data model, it'll interrogate the schema from the database. So we can potentially save a lot of database traffic by enabling this. So we'll set the schema caching to 120 seconds. However, this won't have any effect on its own. We also need to define some form of database caching. And the simplest form is file caching. So separately, we define the cache component and set the class to a file cache. Obviously, our database access parameters will be different on our testing and production servers. So we would need to change these as well. But rather than changing them here directly, what we can do is create a separate configuration file. So we'll remove the database config parameters from here, and instead we'll import a separate dbconfig file. Using require, set the directory name, and then we'll call it db_config.php. We'll then create this file, and we can paste our database parameters in here. Now what I often do is in here I'll put a condition to check which server we're running on. So I'll specify the server name of my development environment and set the database parameters for that. And then in the else assume that I'm in my production environment and set different parameters there. Going back to our main config, the logging, we should remove all but the cfile log route and then probably just output the errors and warnings. Depending on how busy your production server is, you may want to split your file output into separate files. But here we're going to leave both errors and warnings going to the same file. That's about it for the config file. We're currently running the application in debug mode. And this is set in our bootstrap index.php file. So if we open that, and we set Yi debug to false. So that's it, we're ready to go. I'd like to thank you for following me on this journey through Yi, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. In the last 8 sessions, we've covered a lot from the basics of the MVC architecture, installing and setting up Yi, and then the development of our first photo gallery application, testing, theming, and user security as well. I'm already planning many more enhancements and look forward to meeting you again soon to discuss and further this application. If you have any suggestions, then I very much look forward to hearing from you, either via the PAC website or directly via my website. Thank you again, and happy Yi development.